So the final thing that influences liking, so let's back up. Let's talk about the four. We have propinquity, proximity, um, excuse me, similarity. Thank you. Sorry, I had something in my throat. And then finally, physical attractiveness. And basically, what's going to happen here is we like pretty people. we tend to like people who are what we deem as attractive. All right. So what was really cool was a study. This is an older study. I found it because it was once again a really just neat idea. Ethically, I don't know how they pulled this off, or even procedurally. But what they did is they had like a freshman orientation where before school started, they did this thing. And what they did is they kind of set you up. They called it a blind date, but my reading of this article was what they did was they paired you with an opposite sex person for like the night. And so it was kind of like, and I'm making air bunnies here, like your date. And after the end of the night, these researchers asked everyone, would you date this person again? And if the answer is yes or no, tell me what you liked about them. So like rate your partner. And what they found is that if the person would go on a second date with you, what they found is that physical attractiveness trumps any other thing that they measured. They measured intelligence, how sensitive, sincere, independent is the person. None of that mattered when you compared it to physical attractiveness. So in other words, we like pretty people, and those pretty people are going to be rated, or how attractive they are is going to pull a lot of weight in terms of if you're going to see them again. All right. So it's kind of an interesting study. I don't know how they pulled off the blind date thing, but they did. And they found these really cool effects that physical attractiveness really is just like the thing that gets you first. Now, this is not to suggest that intelligence and sensitivity and all those other things aren't important. But when you just meet someone for the first time, you don't know how genuine or non-genuine they are. All you can see is their current physical attractiveness, which is why before you go out on a first date or before you go to a party where you might meet someone or whatever, girls put on their makeup and they dress a certain way to make themselves more attractive. And guys do the same thing too. I don't know about the makeup thing, but they do their hair, they wear whatever clothing is the most stylish at the time, and they do this to make themselves more physically attractive, right? Because that's what's going to get you that second date. All right. What's interesting about this is when they looked at these results deeper, what they found is that this isn't just like men being kind of like chauvinistic pigs kind of thing. Right? So it wasn't like, oh, men rated physical attractiveness, but women, oh, they like the sensitive person. No. Both men and women said that physical attractiveness was the most important feature. All right? So this begs the question, who's attractive? Right? Who is attractive? So the first is, let's talk about what defines attractiveness, and that's going to be cultural standards. All right? So what we mean by cultural standards is when you look at the culture of today so culture, right? It's not only a time period, like what year are you in, but it's also where do you live. And so let's focus on the USA today. Cultural standards for women, it's like the thin hourglass kind of body frame, and it's been that way for a while now. And for men, what's viewed as attractive is going to be like the muscular type of person. Now, the standards of beauty are often reflected in the media that we see. So if you look at magazine covers, for example, if you look at the guys, they have their shirts off and they have like a flat chest and they're six-packed, and sometimes they have biceps. And if you look at women, they have like the large breasts and the big hips and the skinny stomach and those types of things. And that's exactly what these cultural standards suggest. So, however, culture reflects itself in other ways too. So this is a really cool study by Pope et al., 1999. And what he was looking at is the cultural standards of beauty for men as it is displayed in action figures. So they did this with Barbie, the stereotypical thing I'm sure you've all heard, where you blow up a Barbie doll to an average woman height and she would like topple forward because her breasts are so big and her waist is so skinny. Well, they wanted to do that with men. So what you see in front of you, these are 4 pictures of G.I. Joes. And what you see going from like, this is, I believe, the 50s, 1950s. This is the 70s. this is the 90s, and then this is 2000. And what you end up seeing is that over time, the G.I. Joe is getting more and more and more muscular, which reflects the cultural standard of men need to be more and more and more muscular to be considered heroes or to consider valid. So that's what the Pope study did, but it's not just reflected in that too. So if you look at these pictures here, these are from the movie Tangled, where for men, what they're starting to show is, if you just look at the face, for men, they really want this strong jawline, right? And what you see is that a lot of the heroes in Disney movies today, you want them to look attractive, so that way they sell their movie and their merchandise. So we have a pretty strong jawline for men. For women, it's the big eyes, apparently, that sell. The big eyes and kind of like the baby face. I just drew glasses. The big eyes and the baby face for the women. I'm going to show you another picture real quick to compare the men. This is Flynn Rider from Tangled. This is Andy from the first Toy Story movie. Now, the first Toy Story movie came out in the early 90s, and CGI wasn't where it was now. And what you see is that there's a clear difference between how these two look because the technology allowed Flynn Rider to look better than Andy. And what you end up seeing is that when people rate these characters, they did not rate Andy as very attractive. They thought he looked weird and didn't look like a normal kid and just looked kind of goofy. But people love how Flynn Rider looks because he looks more realistic, but also he has a very strong jawline, right? And look at this guy down here. There's like no jawline. It's like that. All right. And that's basically how the cultural standards work. All right. Now, the second thing is going to be facial symmetry. And so there was a study by Fink that we'll talk about in a second. But what facial symmetry is if you were to have a face like that, if you drew a line right down the middle of the face and it was perfect on both sides, what you would have is a symmetric face. And what they found is that facial symmetry is the number one predictor of picking up attractiveness in the face. So look at these two faces up here. Not Fink, but other researchers have done analyses of famous people's faces. And Denzel Washington, it's not going to be a straight line, has one of the most symmetric faces in Hollywood. But he's also a very handsome man. Like, that's not an accident. But look at this guy. This is Steve Buscemi. If you draw him down, he is one of the most asymmetric faces, and clearly he is not an attractive person. And so what you have here is you have facial symmetry. And what Fink et al. did is he was looking at something called the halo effect. Okay? The halo effect is the idea that just based on one characteristic, let's say how attractive you think they are, that makes like this halo around them so that they can do no wrong. All right, so the halo effect is kind of the idea that if you see Denzel he's a bad example. If you see someone who is walking down the street and you're like, wow, that is an attractive person, like you are physically attracted to that person, you will also rate them as intelligent, as capable, as a nice person, but you don't know this person at all. That's what's interesting. That's what the halo effect is where you attribute all these other positive characteristics to someone just solely based on their looks. Now remember, you don't know who this person is. You see someone walk down the street and you're like, man, that's a pretty person. They must be smart and nice too. Like, how do you know that? You don't. And that's what the halo effect is. And that's exactly what Fink et al. Found, is that if you see someone who has really strong facial symmetry, right? So like the Denzel Washingtons of the world, you're going to rate them as capable, healthy, intelligent, nice, compared to the people who have very low facial symmetry. All right. So that's how. Okay. So those are the factors that influence liking. All right. So remember, I said liking at the very beginning of the lecture. Liking can be your best friend, your mother, whoever, but it can also be your romantic partner as well, or the person you're dating. So now we're going to kind of shift gears real quick from liking to loving. All right. And there are several theories that kind of predict differently why we love the people we love. And the first is social exchange theory. It's the same thing that we came up with for the social exchange theory with, when we talked about helping people, where once again, it's this economic game. And what we're doing with this economic game is we are looking at the pros and cons of being with this person that you love. So if you love this person, great. The question is, do you like them? And so what's going to happen is you play this pro-cost game. And that's where the rewards and the cost comes in, the pros and the cons. And just like social exchange theory for helping, if the pros outweigh the cons, you're going to stay with that person. So now what makes the pros and the cons for everyone is different. And also the weight you put on them is also different. It depends on who you are. So for example, if the person is good looking and smart, but they aren't very nice, well, that's two pros and a con for me personally, but maybe you're okay with them not being nice. So maybe that's a pro for you too, right? And that's the way these things work. And just like before, what we're going to do is we are going to play this economic game with pros and cons, all right? Same as before. Now, what's interesting here is about how this theory relates to relationship satisfaction, so how happy you are in your relationship. And what they talk about in your book as it relates to this is called the comparison level and the comparison level of alternatives. So this is best explained with an example. So I'm Chris. Hi. My wife is named Natalie. So let's say I'm with her. I'm still married to her. But when we were dating, I'm with her. I'm only with her. All right. So that's going to be my comparison level. I will rate Natalie on some number, and that number is going to be based on the pros and the cons and the weighting system. So let's say I give Natalie a 4. All right. It's a positive number. That means there's more pros than cons, even with my weighting system. So let's say she gets a 4. I'm just making this number up. She probably gets a 400 for all I know. She's a great person. But let's say she gets a 4. Then what I do is, before I decide, am I in love with her? Am I going to spend the rest of my life with her? What I do is I do the same math for the alternatives. And let's say I had, 3 other suitors vying for my affection. And let's say they scored 3, 3, 1 on the same scoring rubric. Then what's going to happen is we have low alternatives. These numbers are all lower than the number 4. So therefore, I'm going to stay in the relationship. I'm happy with Natalie because she's the best I can get, and that's good for me. If it's equal, so let's say we had a 4 in here, like this. All right, I'm still going to stay with Natalie. All right, because being equal, that's fine. That means you're wanted, but guess what? Everything's good to go. But and you're going to stay with who you're with. But let's say someone scores a 6. Now we have high alternatives. And this is not a guarantee that we will break up, but we may not stay in the relationship. There's an out, because if Natalie and I break up, okay, fine. I'll do the 6th person. I'll bring this person in and date them. And so that's what social exchange theory is. And as you can tell, this is a very high effort cognitive process. Just like it was with helping. It's a very mathematical game that you're playing to make sure that you find the person that you want to be with. And for better or worse, there's some validity to this. Like, we do this more often than you think. And, it's one of those things, like for me, I always said that before I married someone, I wanted to live with them first, just so I knew that things weren't going to get crazy when I lived in the same spot with them. So like my wife Natalie, like when we were just dating, we lived together for a semester, and I was like, so are you going to yell at me if I squeeze the toothpaste from the top or the bottom or something weird? She doesn't, but something weird like that. You got to make sure that works itself out. And let's say she did get mad at me for that. Well, that affects my rating system. And even though you don't think of it like that, no one cognitively thinks, oh, wow, that's a mark. That's a negative. No, that's a con. That's going to go in my math equation. We do that in kind of inherently. We do this. All right, we do this. And this is just one theory of why we love the person that we're with. We're going to talk about some other theories in just a second.